Hello and welcome to TI Now. We're here today at Mobile World Congress Americas 2017 in San Francisco, and joined today with Brian Hendricks, who is Head of Policy and Government Affairs of Nokia, along with Dilip Srihari, Director of Legislative and Government Affairs with TIA, the Telecommunications Industry Association. Gentlemen, both welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
The topic for this session is 5G and siting. And obviously 5G has become a really hot topic for our industry and overall, but there are some issues to be discussed. Brian, let's start with you, if I could, about some of the obstacles that companies are encountering in deploying 5G infrastructure.
Sure, well, first I would say off the top, we at Nokia have actually been describing the local land use siting problems as the greatest impediment in our mind to 5G deployment in the US now. It's no longer access to spectrum, which is always a challenge, but something which is moving along at the FCC very well. What we're experiencing is a very uneven zoning process across the country. We have some localities who have no process at all, and therefore when we approach them about a project with a carrier customer for a demo, there's nowhere to start. There's no office, there's no personnel dedicated to processing applications, there's no master zoning agreement, so you're already looking at many months in order to find the right people and to begin a process. We've seen the opposite end of the spectrum, where you have very well-established communities, but where you have very, very high fees associated with the access to the public rights-of-way, with the attachments. We've moved beyond cost recovery at this point, and it's become a source of revenue generation. We've seen some municipalities suggest that if we want access to the rights-of-way, we should be willing to offer free Wi-Fi service to the entire community. Things of that nature, and while those are certainly understandable things for a community to want, they are nevertheless extraordinary costs imposed onto someone that is looking to deploy what in most instances is hundreds if not thousands of small cells in a particular area.
And so would you, given that, assess this more of a political phenomenon, or also a knowledge gap? Meaning, do the municipalities and the citizens understand the value of 5G to their communities?
I think some clearly do. I think industry has a lot of work yet to do on this front. I think one of the common statements that we'll hear is, well, my phone is working fine now, I have this great LTE network that's giving me all the things that I want on my smartphone, I'm getting streaming video. And what we're talking about are transformational technologies, things like connected vehicles, autonomous vehicles, remote diagnostic medicine and healthcare delivery, things that we're going to require a much more sophisticated network with a lot lower latency and a lot higher throughput than we have right now, and will require a lot more densification of our network deployments. And I don't think industry has done a particularly good job of describing those benefits. But another point that I've made recently is that because we're going to be taking such a huge leap forward in technology, both in terms of what's deployed in the network, but what it enables, we actually are at risk of increasing the digital divide, because we're moving towards a heavily digitalized economy. And if we don't have access in many communities to the high-speed mobile broadband that we're talking about, then there's an increasing number of services that people won't have access to.
Brian, when you think about that build out, when you think about densification, are you referring to the wireless component, or is there also a wireline element that has to be built out further?
Well, I think that there will be both. On the wireless side, we're talking about small cells as opposed to the large macro towers. We're talking about deploying new generations of those small cells that have things like analytics and mobile edge computing in them, but you're going to need fiber deeper and deeper into the networks as well for high-speed backhaul and connectivity. There will be potential for localized data centers. So there's going to be a lot of different kinds of deployment. The majority of what I'm talking about is wireless infrastructure, but there clearly is a major need to also address wireline siting policies as well.
And Dilip, from your seat at TIA, looking at, I think there's a recent NPRM, notice for public rulemaking, proposed rulemaking, excuse me, both for wireline and wireless related to 5G. What's the status of that?
Well, so the FCC under Chairman Pai has been moving fairly aggressively this year to try and move ahead quickly. The chairman is clearly very interested in these issues. So there are two open notices of proposed rulemaking right now. One of them is on wireless issues, and it deals with things like shot clocks for localities to be able to make decisions sooner. Dealing with moratoria, where some communities have just completely blocked deployment of small cells altogether, and also looking at costs and cost recovery, where, as Brian said, some communities are maybe just overcharging and trying to do way more than basic cost recovery. So I think all of those issues would be important to TIA and our members. In addition, on the wireline side, you're looking at pole attachment issues, because as opposed to in 4G networks where you have tall 100-foot towers, here you have small cells at lower heights and more frequently densely deployed, so actually it's relevant to put a small cell on a pole. So as Brian said, both wireline and wireless deployment. So Chairman Pai today indicated sort of strong interest on those issues. He didn't quite commit to moving forward this year, but everyone knows that he's very interested in taking action on those issues, and we're very optimistic and hopeful that he will fairly soon.
And you mentioned Chairman Pai, and recently he created the Broadband Deployment Advisory Committee, BDAC, because it has to have an acronym, right. BDAC. Can you explain to our audience what is BDAC and what should we expect from it?
Sure. Well, BDAC is Chairman Pai's effort to try and bring state and local governments as well as industry and the federal government together at the table to talk about solutions where maybe people can work out some common approaches here. So they have been meeting, and I think the chairman is hoping that they'll come up with model codes, essentially sets of model laws that a state government could adopt or that a local government could adopt that would essentially give those communities the opportunity to be smart cities, smart states, to deploy infrastructure faster. It's beginning to solve some of that education knowledge gap and just giving local officials something of a more robust framework to base their decisions off of when they're making these kinds of decisions. So I think we're going to get the first work product from the BDAC sometime this fall. And then the FCC will have to look at that and see where we stand. So you've got the Notice of Proposed Rulemakings, which is sort of the regulatory policy approach, and then you've got the BDAC, which is sort of the let's work together kind of approach. And I think the Commission will look at those things this fall and figure out how can we move forward from that point.
Legislative question. We have heard a lot about an infrastructure bill from Congress. Is that something that we should expect to happen in 2018? And if so, what might be the telecom elements within an infrastructure bill?
I'll just tackle it briefly before turning to Brian. I mean, the macro political environment is always hard to predict. After healthcare was supposed to come, tax reform and then infrastructure. Healthcare didn't happen. Now they're working on tax reform. We're hoping that they'll get to infrastructure in 2018. The White House has been having meetings and talking about infrastructure policy issues, and they've said they're interested in doing whatever they can to help promote infrastructure, both in terms of citing policy reforms as well as actually providing funding. There may be some things that Congress could do in terms of strengthening the FCC's legal authority to do some of the things that it's looking at doing in the Notice of Proposed Rulemakings. We are certainly very hopeful that Congress will move forward on an infrastructure package, but I will turn it to Brian for the details.
Yeah, I think that the contours of an infrastructure bill are coming together. It's been further complicated a little bit by the unfortunate natural disasters we've had now, because you'll have supplemental emergency appropriations that are going to be necessary for storm relief, and that's going to complicate an already difficult fiscal picture in terms of how are they going to pay for certain elements of tax reform. And so I think that there had been some hope that there would be a fiscal component to an infrastructure bill dedicated to broadband. That might be trimmed back a little bit. We're still hopeful on things like tax credits and potentially some directed funding for foundational research and maybe some early demos of IoT projects. But I think the big thing that the lead mentioned is what everyone is hoping for, is that there will be both a package of executive actions as well as some language in the infrastructure bill itself that will either give the FCC some more authority and guidance on what Congress and the administration would like to see done on infrastructure, and in some cases making changes that the executive can make, for example, streamlining siting on federal lands and things like that.
Excellent. Well, thank you, gentlemen, both for this today on 5G. I also will just note, sitting here in San Francisco, just near Silicon Valley, we are the 3 best dressed people at this conference and have very good haircuts, all in common. Thank you. And thanks for joining us at TI Now at Mobile World Congress 2017.